let's turn our attention, continue our attention to the Gorton and Denton by-election and what it means for British politics. Putting that question out to you, 0344 499 1000. First up, let's hear from Robert and Lord Hayward. He's a Conservative peer. They didn't have much of a good show in that by-election result, losing their deposit, the worst result for the Tories, I think, pretty much ever anywhere. But he's also, of course, as you'll know him well from our election night coverage, a leading pollster too. A very good morning to you, Lord Hayward.
Good morning, Julia. Please call me Robert.
And
I also want to touch on family voting, because that's where
100% we're going to get onto that. Now, look, I mean, the Tories just by the by, no one cares. Lib Dems not in contention. We were told that this was a seat that Reform could win. We were told then that this was a three-way race. It was very close. There might be recount after recount. We wouldn't get the result in the early hours of the morning. It'd be after ages because it was the Labour hold seat, one of their safest seats, but challenges from both the Greens and Reform. As it was a stunning, absolute, Zack Polanski calls it a seismic victory for the Greens. A big, solid majority. Labour pushed into third place behind Reform. What is your big takeaway from that result? What does it tell us?
It tells us that the voters, as we've been watching over the last year, 2 years, are actually unhappy with the legacy parties, i.e. the Conservatives and Labour Party in particular, and they're looking for alternatives, whether they're on the left or the right. They are going in other directions to alternatives. And on this occasion has been identified historically a Labour seat, and therefore large numbers of people, for a whole host of different reasons, decided to support the Greens.
Yeah.
It's a great victory for the Greens, but the people who are really going to suffer under these circumstances are the Labour Party, and particularly number 10. I had a text at something like 3 o'clock this morning saying the recriminations have already started, even before the result had been announced.
I can imagine. I mean, especially as it was the Prime Minister's decision not to run a candidate who many believe, I don't know whether this would be true, I'd love to know your thoughts, could have actually won that seat, the very popular incumbent Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham. He wanted to get back into Parliament. He was basically denied, basically told, you cannot, by the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party, do this because we'll then have to have an election for the mayor, and we'd rather just basically, I think they basically figured we'd rather lose this seat than lose the Manchester Mayor. But actually it was all about Keir Starmer didn't want the King of the North to come down and be able to challenge him for the leadership. Was that the key decision that led to the Labour defeat, do you think?
No, it was one of the decisions. After all said and done, we have an historically unpopular government with U-turn after U-turn, most unpopular incoming government of all time, not only just in this country, but in other Western democracies.
That's quite a thing to say, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Well done, Keir. He's done something. He's managed to achieve something.
It's not so it wasn't the reason, but there is no question in my mind that had Andy Burnham been the candidate, Labour would have won.
Oh, that's interesting. He's got name recognition. He's a very popular figure. He's also a figure who kind of defies sort of the party. He's not just supported by a lot of Labour people, isn't he? This is the interesting thing. The Prime Minister said he's refusing to quit. He said he was very disappointing result, but he pointed out incumbent governments quite often get results like that mid-term. Just like, Donald Trump's facing mid-term elections in November this year. Most American presidents lose the mid-term elections. Most by-elections in Britain, mid-term around this time, they are lost. But this is a catastrophic loss for Labour, given it's one of Labour's safest seats, isn't it?
It is a catastrophic loss, but you're actually interviewing somebody who managed to lose Christchurch quite a few years ago as one of the safest.
You know what it feels like. What chance did the Reform Party ever have?
They were hyping it as they could win. And you should, if you are leading a campaign, you should be very careful in your choice of words. And they kept saying, we're going to win, we're going for victory, etc. Now, there's ways you phrase that, as you know, but they convinced the media they were in with a chance. The opinion polls said that they were in with a chance. At the end of the day, this is a stunning victory for the Green Party, and one shouldn't deny it.
No, absolutely not. What does it mean, though, for the future? Because we've got Zack Polanski saying, the Green leader, who's interestingly not an MP himself, is a London Assembly member, and he's saying, look, this could mean us winning, say, 100 seats at the next general election. Given the unique, well, it's not unique, but unusual makeup of this seat, you've got basically two different I mean, completely different sort of areas, Gorton and Denton. In Gorton, you've got a load of students, again, very much big appeal for the Green Party. We've also got a very large Muslim vote, and we've seen that sectarian campaigning, even leaflets in Urdu for the Pakistani heritage population. And then you've got Denton, which is a largely white working class, much older population. But that's only a third of the seats, which tells you why Reform probably weren't in with a chance overall. But how many other seats are there where the Greens could, either in a by-election, do well, or in a general election when they're having to spread their campaigning efforts over 650 seats?
I think you know me well enough to say that I won't actually start talking about a general election that's 3 years out.
You never do. You never fall for it. Darn.
There is a very significant set of elections coming up on May the 7th.
Yeah.
And this by-election has serious implications for those local elections in England, Scotland and Wales. And there is no doubt that the momentum that the Greens have got coming out of this by-election means that they will do incredibly well, almost certainly, barring some disaster between now and May the 7th, in the London boroughs, in big cities like Leeds, like Birmingham, like Manchester. But at the same time, the Labour Party are going to have to try and pick themselves up. While in Westminster they're debating who should be the leader, nationally the organisation is going to have to try and pick itself up and get out on the doorstep and campaign for those same local elections.
But this is a difficult thing. Reform are taking on, the Tories largely, I take on Labour voters as well. Tories facing that threat from the right. Labour have been focused, I mean, whether it's PMQs, whether it's campaign literature in this election, it's all been about reform. It's all about stop reform, stop reform. But the Greens have crept up on the left, taken over from the Lib Dems as the sort of, the resurgent, insurgent alternative vote on the left. The reality is that Labour is being squeezed massively, and there's a lot of talk this morning from very, very angry MPs, and you'll be getting messages too, and activists saying, we need to move to the left. Is that where the Labour's political future lies, lurching to the left, going back to perhaps more Corbynista appeal?
Not necessarily, because although you're right in saying that there'll be places like Essex, Norfolk, Suffolk and May the 7th where the Reform will be the threat to the Tories, the Reform are the threat to the Labour Party in places like South Tyneside, Sunderland, Thurrock, all across the country. So it's Reform are not just taking votes off the Conservatives. And in those areas where, like Denton, the smaller part of the constituency, people who are traditionally Labour voters are now turning to Reform, and they will show that come May the 7th in many of the traditional Labour bastions around England and also in parts of Scotland and Wales.
Indeed. And it's interesting that their vote held up, as one of our callers just pointed out, to 29%. That was their vote. That's around where they're polling, and so the polling is not a mirage, and when people actually go to the polls they vote differently. Let's also talk about, and you mentioned at the start, these accusations of what's called family voting by election observers. This is an organisation called Democracy Volunteers. They're allowed into polling stations, 2 observers at a time, to observe elections, making sure everything's above board. They issued a statement on the dot of 10 o'clock last night when the polling stations closed, saying they'd seen the highest levels of family voting at any election in our 10-year history of observing elections in the UK. We've seen Nigel Farage saying that this was an election that was a victory for the Greens for sectarian voting and cheating. What do you make of those claims?
Well, I was involved in with Democracy Volunteers when I actually changed the law to make absolutely clear that family voting is not allowed.
And what do we mean by that? Explain to people who've just tuned in what that means.
The Electoral Commission had said it was unclear that people were not allowed to stand alongside other people when they were voting. So I, working with Democracy Volunteers, introduced a private member's bill to stop it. And this is where somebody stands, normally a male, stands alongside a female in the polling booth, at the polling booth, and ostensibly, whether it's physical, just by being there or by instruction, is telling the other person, or maybe telling the other person, how they should vote. And it's presumed often to be the husband telling the wife, it may be father telling the daughter, but it is also on many occasions father telling son or mother telling daughter. So and although the supposition automatically is that it is a Muslim issue, quite strikingly from the work that Democracy Volunteers have done over years, which I've worked with them on, it is actually quite striking how prevalent it is in other communities as well.
Well, I was saying that as far as I've been aware, when there have been allegations of sort of, people voting irregularities, whether it's postal voting or anything else, it has often been, actually, it's Indian subcontinent. So it's not a Muslim issue. It's an issue of people from a heritage whether it's Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, other countries as well, where the norms of basically corrupt political practices are brought over here and are normalised.
I think that's too easy an answer. Okay. In the Runcorn by-election, Democracy Volunteers, for example, actually watched a very elderly British couple where they went to the same polling booth. The wife handed her ballot paper to her husband. Her husband put the cross in the place that they'd been deemed to be the case and handed the ballot paper back.
Just extraordinary. So can I ask you, you say you've worked with this organisation, Democracy Volunteers. I mean, these are reputable, for when they say that, because the Manchester election authorities are saying, they've got note, there were no reports of this at the time, they didn't say anything until after the polls had closed, we don't accept this has happened, no one's raised this. Is there any reason not to believe what these observers have said?
No, Democracy Volunteers not only watch elections in this country, they do so in Holland, in Sweden, and everywhere else. They issue reports, they operate, and they provide their information to the Electoral Commission, etc. Manchester City Council, and I'm a fan of returning officers and presiding officers. They do a very difficult job. But on this occasion, the position is Democracy Volunteers are not allowed to interfere. They have that power to stand in the polling station on the condition that they do not intervene.
Yeah. So
Manchester
that's why
City
they wouldn't
Council
have said anything.
Wrong, I'm afraid.
Lord Hayward, really good to get your view on this. Robert Hayward, Conservative Peer and Pollster, thank you very much indeed. Henry Hill, listening to all of that?
I think, again, it was interesting earlier. We hear so often, people on the right compared to Donald Trump and Trumpianism. But it was interesting, the moment that Democracy Volunteers, which is, as we've said, an organisation that's been around for some time and is run by an academic. I mean, let's face it, the odds of those people making up things for the benefit of Reform UK is really small. All of a sudden, it's a trumped-up fake group making
Left
things
does it
up.
Just as much.
It's just like, the moment it comes up. And I think that we do need to take this kind of thing seriously. But again, as I've said before, it is simply a particularly visible manifestation of a much more widespread problem, which is that postal voting, there's none of this, right? There's no Democracy Volunteer in someone's house when they're looming over their potentially abused or tyrannised partner and making them vote a particular way. And we have now completely normalised postal voting in this country, and we need to roll that back.
Yeah, absolutely. Genuinely, my husband and I both do postal votes. I genuinely don't know how my husband votes. He won't tell me. Quite right. I mean, it's his votes. But whenever I ask people on air, they're talking about it, I'll say, do you mind me asking you how you voted? Feel free not to answer, because no one should ever have to answer how they voted. It's such an important part of our democracy.